Hello, everyone. This is Benjamin from Genius Game, and I'm here to do a recap for episode 1. So the plan is to do a recap video like this for each of the episodes, be able to share my perspective and feedback on what we see on TV. So I've set this up a little bit like a lecture because that's what I'm most familiar and comfortable with. So I've got some slides to go along with this recap to make sure I remember and touch on all the important points. Also, I made this really funny meme. You'll see that my technology skills are slightly lacking. Yeah, technology definitely not my strong suit. I'm glad that is not a main match this season. Yeah, the purpose of these recaps basically is just to share my perspective about the experience, because when you do a show like this, it's really fun, it's really exciting, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, but you also are giving away the control to someone else for how you are shown. And so my perspective being there might be different than what's actually shown, or there's bits and pieces that I remember a bit differently. And the other reason is that I wanted to do these recaps is just to connect with the people who are fans of the show, because as I'll talk about in a moment, I'm actually a huge fan of The Genius. So I watched the Korean series back in like 2015, I think, and just became obsessed. Watched all 4 of the Korean series, and it became my favorite TV show. So I've been obsessed with like reality shows like Survivor and Big Brother and The Mole and those shows since I was a teenager, and have always wanted to do a game like that. I applied to The Amazing Race a couple times, but never to Survivor or Big Brother, and definitely thought that my time had passed. Like I, wasn't ever going to get on a show like this. So when I saw that they were actually doing a UK version of Genius Game towards the end of 2023, I was so excited. I thought for sure it was going to end up being celebrities, because it feels like in the UK, a lot of these shows end up just doing celebrity versions of them. So when it was actually casting real people, I was really excited. So I worked on my application, I sent it off, and got a phone call that day from one of the lovely casting people. And we had a phone call, and then I had a Zoom meeting the next day. And then I went to Berlin that December with some friends to go see the Christmas markets and stuff. And I was like, I think for sure, like there's no way they're going to pick me for this. Like, especially at that Zoom interview, I was like, I'm either going to be too American for a British show or too gay, too awkward, like, not pretty enough, whatever it is. So I didn't really think I had a very good chance. But then actually I got back from Berlin, found out I had COVID. And that day was when I got a phone call saying that I was going to go to an in-person audition in January. And that was basically the last stage of getting cast on the show. I wish, oh my God, do I wish I could tell you guys about the in-person audition. I can't say what happened or any details, but I left that in-person audition about 99% sure that I was going to be on the show, and that if that 1% happened and I wasn't on the show, I would have no regrets. So I did some things during that in-person audition that really showed them exactly the kind of player I would be on the show, and the kind of personality as well. And I just felt super, super confident about my chances. I felt confident about my chances for a few reasons. Like, I think my profession is a really compelling one for a show like The Genius, because I'm an associate professor who teaches negotiations. So I think we didn't actually know at the time of filming that we had these titles that were associated with us. Like, I'm the professor. We didn't know any of that until a few weeks ago when the press releases came out. But they obviously were looking for people from these different backgrounds and had this idea for the titles. So I think that really helped me. And I got really lucky to be, the only super fan of the Korean show who got cast. Like, I don't think they really wanted an entire cast of people who knew about the Korean show and were big super fans. So I got really lucky in that sense. I think my whole thinking throughout the casting process was that it's better to be yourself and to just be the best version of you that you can be, rather than trying to think about what they're looking for and then trying to be that. So the analogy that I kept thinking about was like, basically they're trying to make a soup, right? And they need each of us as ingredients in this soup. And if I'm a carrot, then I can't really become a potato, because they're going to see right through that. If I go in there acting like a potato, they're going to say, this guy's a carrot. Why is he pretending to be a potato? The only thing I can do is go in there and be the juiciest, biggest, tastiest carrot that they've ever seen, and hope that they're making some kind of soup that needs a carrot. And so that was my strategy. I think I told them that analogy, actually. But I think that they're really good at picking up when people aren't quite being genuine and are being a bit fake. So that would be my advice to anyone who wants to apply and try to get on a show like this. Just you need to be sure of who you are and understand who you are and what you're bringing to the table, and then just show that. And yeah, really have the most energy and passion for presenting yourself that you can. So yeah, we found out in early February, well, I did, that I was going to be on the show, and we filmed it in March. So I only had about 5 weeks to prepare. And it was a bit unlucky for me, because it just so happened that during that 5 weeks was basically a time period at work at my uni where I had all of my yearly teaching like condensed into about an 8 or 9 week period. And those 5 weeks of preparation fell during my busy teaching time. So in addition to all the teaching I was doing, I was also trying to rewatch all of the Korean series, trying to get my outfits together. So we had to come up with all of our outfits, and we had to bring enough in case we lasted for all of the episodes, that we had enough things to wear. And actually, I had lost a bunch of weight leading up to filming the show. And so I actually didn't have a lot of like clothes. I was trying to do some shopping. And I was also preparing, I don't know if you can see it, my binder. So this binder had all of my notes on the different games from the Korean show, and my strategies, my notes for what I would do if we played those similar games. I thought about what death matches they would be more likely to use, and I basically made my own versions of those death matches and practiced them. So that whole month I was sort of playing games with friends and playing death matches with friends, trying to get a sense of how different people would approach different games and giving myself some practice. So it was a really, really busy 5 weeks preparing for the show. And then, the day finally came where it was time to go to Genius Game. So about a week or so before we did the actual filming of the show, I went up to London and filmed my backstory. So you can see in the photo here, we went to this school, somewhere in London. We had this school, and they set me up there in like a lecture room, and we had the puzzle box. So I think they got this idea from Knives Out, like the Glass Onion movie, where they had the puzzle boxes in the beginning. And this was really like my first time ever being on camera, like being recorded. And I remember filming this backstory and feeling really, really overwhelmed. Like the cardigan I was wearing, they were really struggling to get the microphone to work. And so at one point, they finally got the microphone in the right spot where they could hear me. And they were like, don't move. So I was there trying to solve this puzzle box, making sure that the lighting was right, that they could hear me and I wasn't moving. And so I was aware of all these things, like the camera, the sound, the lights. And I had the side of the puzzle box that had a math problem on it. So basically, I didn't solve the whole puzzle box. They just had me do one portion of it. And for the life of me, despite having paper and pen on the table in front of me, I could not multiply 11 times 13 to save my life, because I was so overwhelmed by the camera, the sound, the lights, all that stuff. And actually, it was really fortuitous that I was able to film that backstory before we did the show, because what I took from that experience was that in the actual game, I could not let myself be distracted by the cameras, the lights, just everything around filming the show, because it really distracted me from doing this basic math problem. So when we went and did the actual filming, I was like, I'm just going to forget about the cameras. I'm going to forget that I'm being recorded. I'm just going to really be myself, throw myself into the games as if this wasn't for TV at all, because I wanted to be 100% focused and present in the games. I knew I would need 100% of my brain power focused on the games in order to do my best. And anything other than that, I would look back and regret it. And I didn't want to have any regrets. The other cool thing that happened in my backstory is that you guys saw, like, once we opened the puzzle box, then the garnet comes up. And so I have my garnet. So I have my garnet. We each got to keep a garnet from the show. And so I remember, like, I held up the garnet and they said, okay, now you have to say, ooh, a garnet. And I held it up and I was like, this isn't a garnet. And they were like, what? Yeah, it is. It's a garnet. And I said, no, it's not a garnet. And they said, yeah, it's a garnet. And I was like, it's not red. And they were like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, a garnet is a gemstone that is usually red. And so the reason that they're called garnets in the Korean series is because they are red cubes. But these ones are like gold and see-through. So I was like, it's not a garnet. And I remember, like, the producer who was there, like, filming my backstory was like, okay. So they were like sending messages to the production team. And so that was making me a little bit nervous. I was like, do they not know what an actual garnet is? It turns out that garnets, the gemstones, do come in other colors, but they're mostly red. So I do like that these are called garnets because it sticks to the Korean show and, like, what they're called there. But I remember thinking it was funny in the backstory that, like, I was just convinced that the garnet had to be red because that's what color the gemstone is. So yeah, the backstory filming was funny. It was only in the show for like 0.2 seconds at the very beginning, though, which I guess that's TV. It took us like 6 hours to film my backstory, and it was in the show for like a frame. Right, so we get to the actual day of filming. So I remember being really excited, being really nervous. I woke up that morning and my stomach was upset. Like, I was so anxious and excited and nervous. Each of the contestants got taken from the hotel to the set individually. So they really kept us separate. So the first time we ever saw any of the other contestants was on set being filmed as we came into the atrium. So we each had our own little dressing room on the set. We were, kept secret from each other. So I remember going into my little dressing room that first morning. And of course, I had brought all of my outfits for the show, but we weren't able to choose which outfits we would wear. So we just kind of handed it over to them. And there was a wonderful stylist person who basically made sure that the outfits that we were all wearing looked good together as a group. So I remember coming into my dressing room and I saw the pink shirt. My pink shirt was hanging up and I was like, oh shit, they really want to let everyone know who the homosexual is in this cast. So of course they picked out my brightest, pinkest, most flamboyant outfit to show on episode 1. But I was like, okay, that's okay. I was really nervous about sticking out in a bad way in episode 1, just because, I'm obviously American. Like, I have British citizenship now, but I'm American, so I'm different from everyone else in that respect. I was also the only gay person, the only LGBTQ person on the cast. And so I was like, also being tall and having this bright shirt, like, I was nervous that I was going to stick out in a bad way and that it would be easy for people to single me out from early on in the game. But yeah, eventually I got ready. They took me from my dressing room, like, down to the set. And I did not realize that there were the 2 doors coming into the atrium. So I was at the top door. I did not know that Pasha was underneath me, about to come in the bottom door. And I remember peeking through the door and I could see into the set and it was empty. And I got really excited that I thought I was going to be the one person going in first. So I was thinking about Drag Race and how all the queens come into the workroom and how it was cool to be one of the first ones there, because then I would get to meet and say hello to everyone who came in. So yeah, Pasha and I came in and greeted each other. I think they probably picked the two of us to be first because we had bright outfits. And also, I think out of the whole cast, we were two of the more expressive people that had the biggest reactions. So I think they probably felt that we would be good people to welcome and react to everyone coming in. The problem was that I was so overwhelmed in those first moments of day one with people coming in that I kind of held back a little bit. And actually, you can see in some of the shots where we're stood around the table in the middle of the atrium, everyone else is sort of like up on the table. And I'm like back a little bit, like surveying everyone. So yeah, I definitely was observing and really keeping an eye on people, because we didn't have any information about any of the other contestants. So the titles that you guys see, like the DJ, the professor, we didn't know that. So I felt like those introductions were super, super high stakes, because everything that people were telling me, that was information about who they are, how they might be in the game. And so I was soaking everything up and trying to form an impression of everyone around the table. I was also really trying to make sure that I was giving off the right impression. So I was trying to come across as someone who was friendly and funny. So that Love Island joke that I said was planned in advance. Like way before we came to the studio, I thought of some kind of joke I could make in an introduction to be lighthearted and a bit self-deprecating and to come across, a bit non-threatening in that opening moment. Something really interesting that happened is that, so Charlotte was the last one that arrived in the set. And because there's 11 of us, we all came in pairs, but Charlotte was by herself as the 11th person. And I remember she came in from the top entrance and walked down the stairs. And for some reason, I don't know why, they refilmed Charlotte entering the room like 3 different times. None of the rest of us, they didn't refilm anything for any of the rest of us. So already she was like by herself and she was the last one, and they refilmed it 3 times. So I remember thinking to myself, like, is this person a celebrity? Like, is there something special? What is special about Charlotte where she got to come in last by herself, and now they're refilming her entrance as if it's this like really important thing that they have to get right? So that was really interesting. And it goes to show how little things like that, like, I don't think there was anything behind it actually. But it definitely made me look at Charlotte differently. Even though that wasn't really anything to do with her. Like, it wasn't her fault that she was by herself and that they refilmed her coming down the stairs. But I was so suspicious. Like that first day, I was just trying to size everyone up, trying to get an impression of everyone. Another thing that really struck me on that very first meeting with everyone was that Bex was stood next to me, and she seemed to know so much information about what was going on, like in the production and in the filming. Like Bex knew, for example, that there might have been other contestants who were meant to be there, but maybe got sick and couldn't come at the last minute. And I didn't know that. Like, no one had told me that. So I was really suspicious about Bex. And actually, there was a period of time in the beginning of the show where she knew so much about the behind the scenes stuff that I actually thought she was part of the whole production and that she was a fake participant, because we also had 11 people and I knew we only had 8 episodes. So I knew at some point we were going to have like double eliminations in order to have enough people at the very end. So part of me was like, did they put like a fake 11th participant in here? And then at some point it gets revealed that Bex isn't a real contestant and she gets eliminated, and that makes sense. Then we have fewer numbers. I was just so suspicious and like paranoid from day one, like trying to figure out any of the twists and turns. So what I want to do now is give you guys my first impression as we met everyone. So after everyone came into the atrium and we were stood around the table, I can't remember who suggested it, but someone said we should go around and everyone should say one word that describes themselves. And that was actually a really good suggestion because it helped us get to know each other a little bit. I'm sad that they left this out of the episode, but I can see why, because there was so much that they had to cover. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So first was Allison. I was obsessed with Allison from the moment she came in, and especially when she said that she was a crime writer. I think in the episode you could hear me say Jessica Fletcher. So I'm obsessed with Murder, She Wrote. And I just got immediate vibes from her that she was going to be like Angela Lansbury's character in Murder, She Wrote called Jessica Fletcher, who's this crime writer. But there was something to Allison, and you can sort of see it in her cast photo. I felt like people would underestimate her because, she's a slightly older woman. And I felt like people would think she was going to be this nice, cozy character. But I could tell that there was a seriousness to her. And I felt like she was going to be a good ally to work with. And I felt like people would underestimate her, and that would be a mistake for them. So I definitely pegged Allison as somebody that I wanted to work with in the game, and the other people might sort of ignore. And that would be a great opportunity for me to form a strong ally. Allison gave patient as her word for herself, which I thought was interesting and a good one, because anyone who deals with me playing games like this, as you'll see, needs to be patient. So I felt like that was a great one. So next is Amanfi, and the word that Amanfi gave for himself was empathetic, and that was really interesting because Amanfi is like super fit and like really muscly. Like he used to be a personal trainer, so he's the coach in the show. And I was really intimidated by Amanfi because I knew that I was going to get along with most of the women on the show, just because I typically get along with women. I feel like I interact with women a lot easier than men. It's like straight men, I feel like I have a lot of hangups. Like I worry that I make straight men uncomfortable because I'm gay, and I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. So I'm always a bit guarded around men when I'm meeting them, and basically trying to figure out, is this person going to be a bit toxic, or are they going to be, a nice guy? And so when he said that he was empathetic, I was like, okay, that makes me feel a bit better. Like maybe this is a guy that I can actually work with and get to know. I was really nervous going into the show that there would be a bunch of guys who were going to be this like, toxic masculinity, like bullying kind of guys who were just going to bully me and the women basically into doing what they wanted. And I was not here for that. I mean, as you can see with my reaction to Paul, like I was really nervous about these guys coming in and like bossing us around and telling us what to do. It turns out that I ended up sort of doing that. So a bit of self-unawareness on my part, because I think perhaps I was a bit like that in the first episode for sure. So next is Bex. Bex, she didn't really tell us what her job was. So she made the joke about being a NASA scientist. But then she didn't really say, like she said she did escape rooms and stuff, but she didn't tell us that she owns this like huge business and is like hugely successful. So I got the impression that she was hiding something. Like obviously she wouldn't be invited to Genius Game unless there was something about her that qualified her to be there. And so I was really curious to get to know Bex a bit more and to figure out why she was actually there. I think the word that Bex chose for herself was bubbly. I can't remember Bex's in Indies for sure, but I'm pretty sure that Bex said bubbly. But yeah, we were stood next to each other, and we were sort of like sharing glances at each other throughout that first day when we were getting to know each other. So I felt really good about Bex, and I felt like she was somebody that I could work with in the game. Next is Pasha. So we obviously came in together and we got to meet everyone together. The word that she chose for herself was loyal. And something really interesting that happened in those introductions was that Pasha and Badalia, it turned out, sort of knew each other a bit. And they basically said that they knew each other through social media because they're both, GPs, training to be GPs, and they sort of had some similar friends in London, perhaps. I right away twigged that, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. Like if these two know each other, that's very relevant for the game, because what if they team up? That's a natural alliance. Like we need to be aware of this. But I didn't say anything. I kept my mouth shut, but I noticed that Scott was immediately like, oh, well, how do you two know each other? Like Scott also twigged that and was pushing it and really wanted to know more about that connection. And so that told me straight away that Scott, just like me, was really trying to size people up and that he was being really shrewd about getting to know people and who he could work with. Let's see, Bedalia is next. So Bedalia chose honest as his word. So you can see so far everyone's choosing these really nice, lovely words for each other. And at a certain point going around the circle, I was thinking to myself, some of these people are lying because everyone's just picking a nice word that is going to make them look really good. So I was sort of not really trusting all of this stuff from people to a certain extent. Let's see, Charlotte. So Charlotte is the chemist. She picked kind for her word. And like I said, I was really suspicious of Charlotte because of her coming in by herself and refilming her entrance. So I definitely felt like there was more to Charlotte than what we were being told. Indy. Okay. When Indy came in, as soon as she came in the room, she reminded me so much of one of my really close friends who I play loads of games with. And I got the vibe immediately from Indy that she was going to be really clever, really shrewd, and that she was going to be someone to work with in the game. She might be underestimated a little bit because she's younger than people, but she definitely has a mind for the strategy and a mind for playing the games and understanding the dynamics with the people. So actually, out of everyone who came in when we were doing those introductions, I felt like the two people who were the most clever and the most shrewd were Scott and Indy. And I really wanted to work with them because I felt like if we teamed up, we could really come up with some good strategies and we would be able to execute those strategies by influencing everyone else. So I was really curious to see how Indy was going to play the game. Ken. So Ken picked sensitive for his word. So again, another nice positive word. And Ken actually said that he had watched some of the Korean Genius. So that right away put up a little flag for me that Ken knew what was going on and that he had prepared. So I was really keen to figure out who had prepared for the show and how much, because obviously I knew I had prepared loads. And I wanted to make sure that I was aware of how much other people prepared, because if I found myself going into an early death match, I wanted to make sure I challenged someone who was less prepared, because then I have a competitive advantage. So Ken told us he was a comedian, but I also got the feeling from him that he was holding back a bit. So the fact that he said he had watched the Korean show and he was a bit quiet on that first day, I definitely had some suspicions about Ken. I felt like he would be good at the game, and it wasn't clear to me how well we were going to work together. So Paul. Okay, so Paul said competitive as his word, and he revealed that he was a poker player and that he had this career in sales. And you could see it a little bit in the show. I think there was a voiceover of me saying it. I was absolutely obsessed with trying to figure out who the poker player was in the cast. I was convinced that there was going to be a poker player because I just felt like that was an archetype that people would go for in the casting. And I knew I was going to not want to work with the poker player because they're used to bluffing, they're used to games, they know how to lie to people, they're clever. So I really wanted to be weary of the poker player. And then when he said he had a career in sales, I was like, okay, definite red flag. Like, I don't trust people in sales. So sorry to any estate agents out there. I don't have a good impression of people who are estate agents or people who work in sales. Like, I think it's a lot of, lying to people, misrepresenting what you're saying, try to convince people to spend their money on things. So I definitely had some red flags about Paul. He also, I think, wanted to create the impression amongst everyone that he really knew what he was doing and he was really smart and really clever and no one would ever pick him for, you would be stupid to ever pick Paul for a death match. And I think it sort of backfired a little bit for him because I think he came in a bit hot. And I think obviously I had that impression of Paul, but obviously Indy had that impression of him as well, because when that team was able to choose someone to target and put in jail, they picked Paul. So I think he just came in a little bit too hot in the beginning. Right. Then there's Scott. So Scott picked boring for his word, which I thought was interesting because everyone else basically picked these nice positive words and he picked boring. I definitely knew that he was playing a game when he said boring. Like I could tell that he was really smart. He was really shrewd by asking about how Pasha and Bedalia knew each other. So by picking boring, I could tell he was trying to lower his threat level, come across really unassuming. But I was fine with that. Like Scott was actually Scott and Indy were the two people. I was like, I see you, I get you. I think you're clever, but I want to work with you. So that was my impression of Scott. The two words, so I picked two words actually when it came around to me, and I picked focused and diva. So I picked focused because I did want to convey a bit of a strong presence to people that I was going to be focused at the games and like there to compete. But I also picked diva just to sort of take the edge off of that being focused. And that maybe people would think, oh, he's this funny guy. Like, he's self-deprecating. He's not all that serious, even though maybe he's a bit competitive. So David Tennant comes up on the screen. You can see our reactions. Like I was shocked to see David Tennant. None of us knew that David Tennant was associated with the show at all. And I remember I got goosebumps on my arm and I showed Bex. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got goosebumps. So that was really, really exciting. So between the set looking so much like the Korean Genius and then also having David Tennant, I was like, okay, this is major. Like we've got potential here for this show to be really popular. So I was really excited at that point. So they explained the rules of the main match, the bank heist, and then at some point they let us go. And I don't think the time hadn't started yet for the main match. And so Bex and I, we were all like running around the set trying to find things. And basically Bex and I like found water bottles for us that were tucked away in the corner. And we were really excited about finding the water bottles. And then I was also in the little like library room with the table. And I was searching through all the books and all the props. Like they don't show it on the show, but I was searching the set for clues because I was like, maybe they hid something, like a token of immunity or something. Like I was searching everything. And there was actually like a big diamond that was like a set decoration. And I took it and put it in my garnet pouch. And then like a few minutes later, the producers came over the sound and they were like, could everyone please return everything from the set back to the set? So I remember, yeah, it was a bit fun in that beginning moment. Like it was a bit like a kid in a candy store. We were all running around. Okay, so to the main match. Everyone online I'm looking this morning is like talking about how complicated this show is and how complicated the games are. And honestly, I think these people need to chill because the game is really not that complicated. Like you pick a vault to steal. If too many people pick the same vault, you go to jail. If you think you know where someone is going to steal from, you can tip them off. Like get the most money, you win. The game is really not that complicated. And if the public can't follow this game, then this probably isn't the show for them. But I think it says more about the general public than it does about the show. Because actually this game is by far not the most complicated first episode game that we've seen on a Genius show. So I really enjoyed that this first game was a new one. And it was something like, it's a bit similar to like Abundance and Famine from the original Genius in Korea. But still, it was a new game. I was excited to see it was a new game. And I thought it was a great first introduction to the show. I remember the first round happening a little bit differently than how it was on the show. And that could just be my memory being faulty. But I remember all of us going into the lounge together, all 11 of us. And we were talking about how we could play the game together. And then eventually we were like, okay, we should split up. And 5 of us got up to walk. And it was only once we stepped out into the hallway that we realized that we were in the minority. Like it just happened in the blink of an eye. And that was actually a big lesson for me, that you have to be mindful at all times in this game. Because if you take 2 footsteps in the wrong direction, you could all of a sudden be left out of the majority. So once I realized that we were in the minority, we went to our little side room. And I was like, we have to come up with a strategy. Like we're in the minority. And the show actually doesn't do it justice. Like, Paul really was distracting us. Like, I was trying to convey my strategy to people where we could use our tip-offs to put someone from the other team in jail, because we didn't know that Scott was basically saying the same thing. We didn't know what their strategy was. So at least my strategy was the same as Scott's, and we could try to get someone in jail and keep them there, which would help protect all of us. But Paul didn't understand the rules of the game. And also, Bex was standing by the door in the lounge because she was wanting to see if the other team was going to come spy on us. And Paul kept being like, sit down, sit down. And I didn't really like that. So he was sort of barking orders at us and telling us where to go and what to do. But he also didn't really understand the rules of the game. And it made it really difficult in that small amount of time. We only had 15 minutes in that first round. It made it really hard for us to actually adopt the same strategy. And then also, you saw Pasha came in at one point to distract us. And I immediately was like, this is bullshit. Like, if you have this plan that involves everyone, we could have done it together. We didn't need to leave. So I was trying to get them out. And then between all of that, the time ran out. And I remember feeling so frustrated at the end of that first round, because I felt like I had a really good understanding of the game and the rules and a good strategy, but I just couldn't put it together because nobody was paying attention and there was too much distraction. So at the end of that first round, when they showed the results up on the screen and it said that Paul went to jail, I immediately knew at that point what the other team had done. I knew that they had a strategy where they would use 3 tip-offs on Paul in round 1, and they were going to use their other 3 tip-offs on Paul in round 3. So as soon as those results got revealed in round 1 and they started the clock for round 2, I immediately went into the little bar room, the small room, and Indy was there. And I said to Indy, is this what you're doing? Like, you're using 3 tip-offs on Paul in round 1, you're using the other 3 in round 3. And she said, yeah, how do you know that? And I was like, well, because that's the strategy I would have done. Like, it makes sense. And so basically then we all went to the lounge. And that's why in the second round, we all stood in the lounge and we basically worked together, because I had figured out what what their plan was. And we just told everyone, like, everyone who wasn't Paul in jail was in the lounge, and it all came out. Like, the whole plan came out. So everyone knew that the plan was to keep Paul in jail. And I was certainly happy with that because he had annoyed me. And I think Bex and Allison and Bedalia were happy with that because they didn't want to come in last place. So basically, at the start of round 2, everyone knew what was going on. And that's why we all worked together and just let Charlotte take the crown. Because at that point, none of us were going to take the crown and also go to jail. We were happy to just get our 1s and our 3s and avoid last place. So they kind of left that out, which is a bit sad because I immediately worked out what the other team was doing. And I kind of wish they would have shown that. The other thing that they didn't show is that at the end of the main match, when Paul was declared the loser, Charlotte, they came out with the tray and they gave Charlotte her garnets. And I saw Charlotte take one of the garnets and slip it to Indy because I was stood in the back of everyone. And then they said, okay, Paul, you need to pick someone for the death match. Now, watching the Korean series, they had name tags in the Korean series that had their names and it had their number of garnets, and it was digital. So the producers could change the number on the name tag. So for me, I felt like it was fundamentally important, just as a rule of the game, that the person going into the death match should know how many garnets the other players have at the time that they choose someone. Because if Paul picks somebody for the death match and beats them, he gets to take their garnets. And even though I wasn't rooting for Paul at that point and he had annoyed me, I felt like it was fair for Paul to know how many garnets everyone had. So I walked up to Paul in the middle of the room and I whispered in his ear, Paul, you need to ask everyone how many garnets they have. And so Paul did that. And that's when Indy said, I've got 2 garnets. So the show makes it look like Indy just volunteered this information. But the only reason that happened is because I whispered in Paul's ear. And I did that for two reasons. Number one, I just felt like it was the fair thing to do because I did feel like he should know how many people had. I also felt like by giving him that help and tipping him off that he should ask, he would be less likely to pick me for the death match. So there was actually this really prolonged negotiation where basically Amanfi, Pasha, and Indy were all trying to negotiate with Paul, and they were all offering their garnets to him to not pick them. And eventually he did pick Pasha. But had Paul won that death match, Indy and Amanfi would have technically owed him a garnet. Now, whether they would have given him that garnet, I don't know. But actually, Paul did negotiate for the two of them, if he were to come back from the death match, that they would give him one of their garnets. There were a couple things from this episode that were surprises to me as I was watching the episode. So we have a big group chat on WhatsApp, and we've been in there for over a year now since filming, like talking about everything. So I wasn't sure how many surprises there would be, but actually there were a couple big ones that I did not know happened. So the first one was when Pasha wrote her note to Paul and basically told Paul to target Indy for the death match. I was completely shook when I watched this happen because in our rules, it specifically said that we were not allowed to write notes and pass them to other players. And I remember questioning that with the producers before we ever started the game, because in the Korean Genius, they passed notes all the time, and it was really exciting, and it was a fun way to give information to people. And I think their concern was that they wanted everything to be on camera. Like they wanted all the communication to be on camera. So when Pasha passed that note, I was like, what? Like that's against the rules. Like how did they let her get away with that? But I was also shocked because I had no idea that Pasha was trying to target Indy like that. So I knew that people from the majority group, like basically Ken, Pasha, Indy, and Amanfi, I knew that they were all nervous about getting picked for the death match and that they were all talking to Paul. But I thought they were just trying to get themselves safe. I didn't realize that they were throwing other people under the bus. So that was a huge shock last night that Pasha was actually targeting Indy. The other big shock was that I didn't realize Amanfi was telling Paul to abstain in round 3. So I think Amanfi was feeling guilty and actually tried to help Paul. I did not, none of us knew that. And also, Amanfi actually throwing Allison's name to Paul as a potential person to call into the death match. Like that shocked me. I did not think that Amanfi had done that. So that was really, really interesting to see that actually these people who I didn't think were playing the game that much in that first episode from the majority team, like obviously Scott and Charlotte had that plan. The others I didn't really think were playing all that hard, but they actually were. Like they were trying to influence Paul and throw these other people under the bus. So that was really cool to see, actually, that people were playing so hard. Okay. Something that I'm going to do in these recaps is basically sort of like a power ranking for the episode, like who I thought played the episode the best. And I'm going to do it in the form of a Dance Moms style pyramid. So like Abby Lee Miller, I am going to rank all of the contestants in a pyramid. And so each episode will be able to see who's on top of the pyramid and who's at the bottom of the pyramid. So for episode 1, I'm going to put Paul at the bottom of the pyramid. I don't think Paul played this episode very well. He came in and made a bad impression on people in the very beginning. It took him a while to understand the rules of the main match and the death match. And, ultimately it wasn't a great episode for Paul. That being said, I will say that they didn't put this in the show, but by the time the death match rolled around, I was actually rooting for Paul because even though he annoyed me during that first day, I realized that if Paul went home, then my group from that day would be down to just 4 people. So me, Bex, Vidalia, and Allison. And the other group had all 6. And so I was really nervous that that group of 6 was going to stick together and basically just pick the 4 of us off one by one. And if Paul won the death match and came back, he would have 4 garnets, Basha would be gone. So it'd be 5 against 5, but Paul would have garnets, and he would presumably still be out for revenge against like Scott and Charlotte. So Paul would be a huge meat shield, taking a lot of heat from that team, and I could kind of just blend in, play my game, and not really be sticking out too much. So yeah, even though I was against Paul throughout most of that episode, I was actually rooting for him in the deathmatch because I felt it would have been better strategically for my game had he come back. So next on the pyramid, I've put Pasha. I was really impressed with Pasha's note to Paul targeting Indy. Like that was a move I didn't see her really making. But the reason I've put her down here is because ultimately she did get picked for the deathmatch. I also did like that she came in and tried to distract us in the first round. Like that was actually a good move for that team, like to stop us from having a coherent strategy. So Pasha did make some interesting moves this episode, but I had to put her second to last because the beginning of that deathmatch was rough. Like neither Paul or Pasha really knew what was going on with Same or Different. Kudos to Pasha for eventually catching on to what the game was about, and she came back and actually ended up winning. But for a while, it was looking pretty rough because neither of them were doing that great in the deathmatch. And I was like, how are they going to edit this to make us look like geniuses? But in the end, she pulled it out. So it was a really great come from behind win for Pasha. Next, I've put Bedalia. This was a really quiet episode for Bedalia. He was in the minority group with me. He didn't really come up with that much strategy, at least what was shown on the show. So he was kind of along for the ride, basically, this episode. And same for Bex. So that's why I've put Bex here as well. The reason I put Bex slightly higher than Bedalia is because I think Bex was playing a good social game. So you saw the scene where Amanfi pulled her aside and said, look, I want you to be my person. We're going to make an alliance and stick together. Bex kind of reacted a bit more coldly to that proposition than I thought she would. So, if it was me, I would have been like, yeah, sure, Amanfi, like we're best buds, like stick together all the way. But she was obviously playing a good social game in order for Amanfi to come talk to her. And I think she made a good impression on the group. So next I've put Ken, just because Ken was in that majority group. He didn't play quite as hard as other people, but he didn't really need to. So sort of a quiet episode for Ken as well. Like as long as he wasn't chosen for the death match, then he was fine in this episode. I put Allison next. So what they didn't show in the episode is that in the final round, I had 5 million. And if I could get the crown, I would have 15 and I would get a garnet. And so I went to Allison and I said, look, Allison, you don't have 5 million. So there's nothing you can do in order to get to 15 and get a garnet. And I was like, do you still have your tip off? And she was like, yeah, I do. And I said, okay, I still have mine. And I said, would you use your tip off to try to help me steal the crown? Because if I get the crown, I'll get an extra garnet and then I can use that garnet to help you and I in the game. And Allison said, yeah, who should we tip off? So we knew that Indy was going to go for the crown because she was also on the 5 million like me. So I used my tip off on Indy, or Allison did. One of us used our tip off on Indy. And so we had one more tip off. And we thought that Amanfi was the most likely person to go for the crown as well, because we thought he was going to try to get to 20 million and try to win the game. So I'm pretty sure we used our tip-offs on Indy and Amanfi. It turns out that Bedalia used his tip-off on Amanfi, and Amanfi didn't go for the crown anyway. So had we used our tip-offs on Indy and Charlotte, I would have actually got the crown and got the 15 million, which would have been a really genius move for the first episode. So I'm sad that we only got half of that correct. But yeah, Allison, like, at least was part of that plan. I felt at the end of this episode that Allison was my closest ally because she really helped me in that moment and was willing to help me in the game to try to get an extra garnet. So I felt really close to Allison. I really enjoyed working with her. Unlike me, who is a bit manic and like running all over the place and a bit stressed, Allison was really calm and really chill. And so I really gravitated to her energy and I really liked working with her in the game because she definitely kept me a bit more calm, which was good for me, I think. So, okay, I put myself next. I felt like I had a good episode. So I had some really good moments here that weren't really shown. So I came up with the strategy for the minority group, even though we couldn't get on the same page. I also had the moment of trying to convince Paul that the other team was against him so that he would pick one of them for the death match. The other thing I did that I thought was a really genius move here that they just left out of the show. So remember I told you that at the end of the game, I whispered in Paul's ear to ask how many garnets everyone had. After the death match was over and we were all stood in the atrium, I went over to Indy and I said, Indy, when I whispered to Paul, I actually told him, please don't pick Indy. She's not against you. And Allison was next to me. And Allison said, yeah, Ben really had your back when he was talking to Paul. And so Indy looked at me and Allison and she was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Like, I'm so glad that you did that. Thank you. Now, I still to this day do not know why Allison said that. I don't know if Allison, because I whispered it to Paul. So I don't think Allison actually knew what I had told Paul, but I think she was just helping me and being like, I think she assumed I was telling the truth and just wanted to back me up a little bit, but it was so incredible. So I basically whispered to Paul so that he would know Indy had an extra garnet, and then somehow was able to convince Indy that that whisper was actually to protect her when it was actually to put her on Paul's radar. So I really wish they would have shown that in the TV show, because that was like a really genius, very subtle moment that I had that endeared me to Paul and also endeared me to Indy, even though I was actually sort of throwing her under the bus in a way. So I was quite happy with my episode. So next I've put Amanfi. Amanfi had some plays this episode. It was really cool to see him play the game. So, he tried to help out Paul. He had his strategy for going for the crown. He ends up getting an extra garnet for himself. He tried to form this alliance with Bex. So I thought Amanfi had a really good episode, and it was really nice to see him have those strategic moments. I put Indy next. There were a few like subtle things that Indy did this episode, and I really noticed them when I watched it the second time. If you look in the majority group when they were debating about who to target in the main match, Indy's the one who suggested Paul. And I was really grateful for that, because it could have just as easily been me and I would have been in the death match. But Indy was the one who threw out Paul's name. So she was really controlling that and targeting the person she wanted. And I thought that was quite ballsy. She also took control of kicking us out of the room, which was really interesting as well. And if you remember, when Amanfi was having his conversation with Paul, where he was trying to get Allison into the death match, Indy was right there and she was watching that and she heard it. And she said, Amanfi, what are you doing? Indy is smart, guys. She's paying attention. She's really clever. She's really shrewd. And I could pick up on that from day one. And so I think it was quite subtle this episode, but Indy had some really good moments. Okay, at the top of the pyramid, we've got 2 spots left. I've put Scott in second place. So I think Scott had a really good episode. He was the strategic mastermind of the majority group. He perhaps came across a bit ruthless, but I think that's great in the Genius. Like, we need some people who are going to play ruthlessly. His strategy was, really similar to mine, to try to isolate someone and throw them into last place. I think it's a great strategy. He ended up getting his immunity. And then the person I put in first is Charlotte. The reason I put Charlotte at the top of the pyramid is because she benefited just as much from Scott's plan, except she doesn't have the target on her that Scott does. Because Scott got a lot of the credit for coming up with the plan to put Paul in jail, I think people thought, okay, Scott's here to play. He's ruthless. He's aggressive. And even though Charlotte is just as aggressive, people didn't see it that way. And so I think Charlotte really played the social angle of that strategy a little bit better than Scott did. So that's why I've put Charlotte at the top of the pyramid this week. Okay. My favorite contestant from any version of The Genius, from any season, is Kim Kyung-rin from Genius Season 1 originally. And she came back for All Stars. She's my favorite contestant. I always root for the women in these shows. And she's one of the few women in the Korean series who played a bit aggressively and, tried to actually come up with her own plans rather than just going along with what everyone else said. So Kim Kyung-ren is my queen. She's my genius queen. And so at the end of each of my recaps, I'm going to give out the Kim Kyung-ren Queen of the Episode award. And it doesn't necessarily go to the person who's at the top of the pyramid. This goes to the person who really impressed me with some moment of strategy or style. Basically, who was the queen of this episode. And for episode 1, I'm going to give the award to Charlotte. And I'm going to tell you why. Charlotte told us after the filming was over that she purposely chose outfits to wear that started out really innocent looking and then got progressively less innocent looking. So this outfit that she wore on the first day, I told you earlier, we didn't get to request when we wore our outfits. Charlotte actually said to the stylist person, I would really like to wear this one on day 1. So this little like cutesy little dress with the little ribbons in her hair, that was all strategic on Charlotte's part. She did that on purpose so that she would look like this unassuming girl who couldn't possibly be this like assassin who's going to target someone and throw them into the jail. I just think that that is so fierce that she used her outfits and planned them strategically to manage her impression that the other people would have of her. That's fierce. So that absolutely deserves the Kim Kyung-ren Queen of the Episode award. So well done, Charlotte. So really exciting first episode of Genius Game UK. My strategy going into episode 2, just to give you guys a preview of what's about to come. So I was really nervous about this group of 6 being the majority alliance. I was nervous that they were going to stick together. Obviously, I didn't see that they were sort of throwing each other under the bus. I didn't know that. So I was really nervous that they would stick together and start picking the rest of us off one at a time. So my plan for episode 2 was that before we started playing the main match, we would always get a little bit of time to talk with people. So I wanted to try to form an alliance with Bedalia. And basically, Bedalia would try to team up with Scott, Ken, and Amanfi because I felt like it was easier for me to make relationships with the women. So the plan was, I'm going to try to make a relationship with Basha, Indy, and Charlotte. Bedalia, you're going to try to make relationships with Ken, Amanfi, and Scott. And then between the two of us, we've got inroads to this dominant alliance, the majority alliance. And then we can use those connections. So like if Amanfi wins the next episode, then you can tell Amanfi, don't pick Ben, pick someone else for the death match. And if Indy wins the next episode, I can tell Indy, don't pick Bedalia, pick someone else. So that was my plan for how to infiltrate this majority group on day 2. So you'll have to see what happens in the next episode. The other thing is that after we took breaks in the filming, I would go back to my dressing room and I would take notes in my little binder. So I have a little journal from the first episode. And after we filmed the first episode, this is what I wrote in my journal. I said, I'm so exhausted. I have an awful headache. I would have eaten dog shit to make it to the end, but I'm so exhausted now that I'll be relieved to go home. This is a physically and mentally exhausting test of endurance. The young people have a big advantage. So that was my top line summary of the first day. It was a really long day of filming, and a lot of us weren't drinking enough water because we were nervous that we would have to go to the toilet like during a game. And they told us going into it that if we needed to use the bathroom, they would not stop the timer in the middle of the game. So I think a lot of us were dehydrated. There was the lights on us all day long. It was obviously a stressful situation. So a lot of us had headaches by the end of the episode. And that's why I realized actually, like, if you make it to the end of this thing and you do this 8 times in a row, it's a test of endurance, like physical and mental. So yeah, take it from somebody who's really competitive, and this was like a dream come true for me. It was so much harder than I thought it would be. The other thing I'll say is that in this first episode, I really didn't like that by taking 2 steps out of that room, I put myself in the minority without realizing it. And I was out of control in this episode. I was not in control of my destiny. And I didn't like that feeling. And so I basically told myself for the next episode, I'm going to play more aggressive. Like, I'm not going to let people boss me around. I'm not going to end up in the minority. I'm going to take control of my destiny. And if I go out, I go out, but at least it was on my own terms. So that was my mindset going into episode number 2. So thank you all very much for watching this recap. If you have any questions about the first episode or any questions in general, feel free to comment. So I'll be looking at all the comments, and if there's things I missed, I can add those into the start of the next episode recap. So yeah, thank you so much. See you next time.